In just over 100 years, a road team in a Stanley Cup Final had never won after trailing by 3 goals until last night. The Oilers just love doing things a little bit more dramatically than other NHL teams. In stunning comeback fashion, they level this rematch of the Stanley Cup Finals at 2 with a 5-4 overtime victory, with that man Leon Draisaitl scoring the winning goal. But this game really was all about Chris Knoblauch and Calvin Pickard, a man who the Oilers hired and from then on out has just been known for his in-game mid-season adjustments. And Calvin Pickard, mind you, someone with a sterling record in the postseason as a goaltender, 6-0, but had not played since Game 2 of the Golden Knights series because of injury, but stepping into Stuart Skinner's place and really holding his own against this vaunted Panthers squad. And there are going to be a lot of questions asked about the Florida Panthers, but still a highly impressive performance that they kind of just let slip away. But the key to this game was potentially the Oilers finally figuring out how to play as a unit defensively, because the Panthers are the only team in this series to have a statement victory. The Oilers have had to claw their way back from the dead in both of their victories to make this a series. But a series it now is because of that Edmonton fight. But still, for large portions of this game, the Florida Panthers had Edmonton's number, and yet it is headed back to Edmonton now, 2-2. And Edmonton now has a chance to finish off this vaunted Florida team and vanquish the Demons with home ice advantage. But let's get into the details of this game. Outside of potentially the in-game adjustment by Knoblauch to bring in Pickard, even though it was a big game, I feel as if the Oilers are unaccustomed to getting off on the right foot in this postseason especially. They allowed 2 goals in each period in Game 3. They allowed 3 in the first of Game 4. And even in their other win this series, it did not look good. Actually, this is an interesting stat that I just found on ESPN. It was the 6th time in the first 10 periods of this series the Panthers have come away with multiple goals. So as you can see, Edmonton clearly is not giving itself the upper hand early in games, which might lead to why the Panthers have cemented their status with early dominance as a team that Edmonton cannot fall asleep against. But I do feel as if Knoblauch's decision to bring in Pickard really helped settle the Oilers down, because I think there were a couple of trust issues in this series, if I'm going to be honest with you, with Skinner in net, because after a sterling series against Vegas, stepping back into the starting role for that matter, with the injury of Pickard, posting 3 consecutive shutouts to win that series, going into the Star Series for the most part, shutting down that vaunted Dallas Stars team, who was looking very good. But Pickard, the interesting thing about him is that he still has that unbeaten streak in the postseason to his name, despite the fact he has not played due to injury that much. And so I feel as if the Oilers, with that in mind, and reinvigorated and refocused in terms of being more aggressive, winning pucks up high, winning in the forecheck, that allowed them to boost their shot share in the second period, which is where this whole game turned on its head. They went from only having a 38.4% shot share to a 55.6% one in the second period. And to make this even more interesting, it was at their second multi-goal period during the Cup Final. I believe their first was that last game where they had three, or the last game in Edmonton for that matter, they had 3 goals in the first period. But I feel as if Edmonton could have let this game slip, right? They only allowed 8 high-danger scoring chances in that period. They allowed 7 in the first alone. But then, with 20 seconds left, all hell breaks loose. They lose Reinhardt, and he gets an easy kind of goal at the far post to level the game and send it to overtime. It's never a Stanley Cup Finals game, especially in this series, without a little bit more chaos. But the thing about this Edmonton comeback that was so impressive was the fact that they were able to absorb all that pressure. They were able to withstand that 3-goal advantage for the Florida Panthers and come out on the other side. And to be honest with you, that Florida lead was not necessarily Skinner's fault, or anyone's fault for that matter. They just were more aggressive on the power play. They had more power plays. That's kind of been a theme of the series and has led to a lot of frustration amongst the Edmonton players and locker room that Florida seemed to be getting away with a lot more, whilst Edmonton aren't necessarily doing that themselves. But a large part of that comes from their lack of defensive solidity that has seen them kind of lose their ground on a couple of occasions, specifically in certain periods and certain critical moments, that finally was turned on its head in this game. Consider this. In the first period alone, they allowed 17 shots. For the rest of the game, they only allowed 23 with Pickard in net. They blocked 28 shots. They only allowed, in overtime especially, the Panthers to have 1 high-danger scoring chance, and they had a 57.14% shot share in the overtime period. And I feel like, well, with the whole narrative that, yes, this team can play defense. Yes, this team can find ways to shut down elite squads. This was a positive step forward. And I feel as if the Panthers, despite being the far superior team in this game for large portions of it, are now the ones who had to answer all these questions. Because this could have been the second straight game where Florida had a resounding victory. They had so many chances. But whether it be Pickard's dominance, the Oilers finally shoring up defensively, or just the fact that the Oilers now feel as if they can actually be in rhythm against the squad and have overcome whatever mental barriers they placed in their minds, whether it be from last year or this year after that drubbing in Game 3. So now the Panthers have to answer for themselves. In Game 5 at Edmonton is going to be really interesting to see if Edmonton can either carry over the momentum they found in this game, or yet again, it's another positive start for the Florida Panthers. Because I feel as if Florida, despite the fact that they kind of lost their footing in this game, it's not like Calvin Pickard was just a statue in net. They forced him to make some incredible saves. Not just in the second and third periods, but in overtime as well. They could have won that game. He made an incredible save on Sam Bennett. The save where he kind of knocked it off his glove onto the crossbar without really knowing where the puck ended up. And so I feel as if the question for Florida is going to be, will they let that one knob block adjustment, much like what he did last year by sticking with a guy in Philip Broberg, who's now not in Edmonton anymore, but was a crucial part of the defensive success last year, to get into their heads. Because Knobloch is known for doing this. It's not like this is the first time Knobloch has done something drastic in order to get more out of his team. No. This was a move highly entrenched in the trust and belief Knobloch has built in this team, and the reciprocation of the team and the players he decides to believe in rewarding his decisions. So the Panthers now have to prove that Game 4 is not necessarily how the Stanley Cup Final is going to be decided. Because Game 3 certainly feels like the biggest statement thus far of this series. Because the Oilers have not necessarily looked all that dominant, even when they have scored multiple goals in periods throughout this final. They just haven't. And so Florida has to take advantage of that knowledge, because in all intents and purposes, we look at the first 4 games of this series, the Florida Panthers could very well be Stanley Cup champions already. I'm not even joking. They could have swept the Edmonton Oilers at this point, and yet it's a tied series with Edmonton having all the momentum and now having home ice. So now, unlike last year, when the Panthers forced Edmonton into a hole, this is a whole new series, a whole new horizon for Florida to navigate. And I feel as if, as we kind of segue to some external factors, especially considering this series, that chaos does kind of favor the Edmonton Oilers. I think they have thrived in chaos throughout this postseason, and despite the fact that they have looked overmatched in almost every game in the Stanley Cup Final rematch, they're still in it because they refuse to let up. They had 2 overtime games, a blowout, and both teams have had 3-goal periods in this series. In fact, this series is the third in NHL history to see at least 7 total goals in the first 4 games. And it's the 4th most goals in Cup Finals history through 4 games. It's also the first final we've had 2 instances of game-tying or winning goals the last 20 seconds of regulation. Sam Reinhart's goal beat Corey Perry's game-tying goal in Game 2 as the latest goal ever scored to tie or win a game in Stanley Cup Finals history. That is how chaotic this series has been. But amidst the chaos is where Edmonton thrives. And so that is why, if Edmonton, now like I mentioned countless times about this video, with home ice advantage, can embrace a chaotic nature, and the Panthers are kind of rattled a little bit, a little shaken by this result, then that's when you have to start favoring, against all odds, this Edmonton Oilers squad. And they also have the more, shall I say, impactful players, despite the fact that guys like Sam Bennett are still doing their thing. And Matthew Tkachuk finally heated up in this final. And you still have the prowess of Alexander Barkov, one of the better two-way forwards in the NHL. You have Sam Reinhart, one of the best all-around players in the NHL. The Oilers have the better individual talent, and that could matter very much in this series. Consider this. Leon Draisaitl now has the most overtime goals in a single postseason with 4. He has 2 in the Stanley Cup Final already. He also had the record for most overtime goals in the regular season. Now, pair that with the fact that he thus tied Connor McDavid for the most points in the playoff this season. They both now sit, along with Mark Messier, the 2 players behind Wayne Gretzky with the most seasons with 30-plus point postseason performances. Combine that with guys like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who finally got off the board in this final and has tons of experience, the longest tenured Oiler, to Corey Perry in his 18th NHL season at 40 years of age, scoring a game-tying goal in a Stanley Cup Final. To have 2 goaltenders who have had their names thrown in the mud of this postseason. Stuart Skinner, yes, having a terrible Stanley Cup Final, but getting them there in the first place after Pickard goes down with injury, and now Pickard picking up where he left off in relief of Skinner, becoming the first goaltender to win a Stanley Cup Final game in relief since Andrei Vasilevsky did it in 2015, and also the 4th goaltender to win 7 straight postseason games. I believe the first one without a loss, potentially. He didn't start his team's first game of the postseason. Only Osgood, Plant, and Ward were able to do that. And so, combine that with the chaos of this Stanley Cup Final, and despite, like I said, the Panthers constantly pouncing on this Oilers team early and often, you got to credit them for staying in it. You got to credit Chris Knoblauch for trusting his intuition, because had he not, potentially the Oilers would have been out of the playoffs sooner, and they may have been swept in the Stanley Cup Final. So you have to credit them, and you have to credit the beauty of hockey. You can never get anything like this almost in any other sport, really, where literally anything can happen on the ice. Both of these teams, potentially not as evenly matched as it has looked on the ice, but still a tie series. As we head back to Edmonton, the narrative shifts. Had Edmonton lost this game in resounding fashion, I almost guarantee you every single pundit and analyst would have been saying this was over and it could have been over sooner. But now, the Panthers are the ones with unanswered questions on their plate. Can they solve Pickard? Can they close out games a little bit more consistently? And most importantly, can Paul Maurice now react to Chris Knoblauch? Because Chris Knoblauch has responded fantastically to what Paul Maurice has been able to do in this series. So, look for in Game 5 a couple of adjustments from the Panthers, but also the beauty, the chaos of the Edmonton Oilers. Because that just might be where Edmonton has a slight advantage in this series heading back home. That'll just about do it for today's edition of Sporting Views. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to have constant updates as the Stanley Cup Finals and NBA Finals wind down. Game 4 between the Pacers and the Thunder taking place tonight. The FIFA Club World Cup is almost underway. Going to have a lot of exciting content stemming from that. We'll be talking a lot about some off seasons, especially in the NBA, where some blockbuster trades could go down. So stay up to date with this channel, because I love giving you guys as much up-to-date sports news as possible. And as always, I'll see you very soon.